Hey, what's up, guys? It's Fred chatting here. I will do a quick intro. I see a lot of familiar faces on the uh, Zoom list here and participant list. And I want to try to treat this like a round table at the end of the conference where I'm between you and a drink and we're just at the table talking. So hopefully that'll work out well for everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Fred Chatting. I am a first and foremost 20-year member of PACE, former chapter president here in the Washington, D.C. area. So I have drank all the Kool-Aid that ATA and PACE has to offer in its past form and in its current form, and I'm still here. I currently serve on one of the national, planning committees for PACE, where we talk about events and kind of like the future and the marketing of PACE in the future. And we get a lot of good insight from that, from what our member experiences are telling us and what our own individual experiences are telling us. And as the conference came into play, they wanted to do some roundtables, obviously live, but this has kind of been the new live, Zoom, that is. And one of the topics that came to mind for me when we were just talking about what are some ideas, what was top of mind with me was what was going on with me. And that was given the role that I have and the work that I do as an outsourcing advisor, helping companies find BPO partners and working with them on their vendor management stuff. 2020 was busy and just wrought with movement to either BPO suppliers or movement of existing captive audiences, captive centers, to basically remote environments. So that was one of the things that we kept talking about. And I said, well, I can host a roundtable and bring up these topics, and hopefully we can get some good interaction from folks on both sides. I know we do. I see some folks from financial services, AT&T, e-commerce, just knowing some of these names, consulting and also the BPO side. So I just like to kind of give you my 2020, and I'll let that kind of spill over into whoever wants to take it next. Maybe I'll pick on you, Jason, to kind of follow up on kind of your experiences, because I know at New York Life, there were some cool things that happened. And I know Krista's seen a lot too. But 2020 for me was interesting. At the end of 2019, I just came back from a great trip to South Africa, where we had a chance to visit a number of centers and learn a whole lot about that then emerging kind of market. So 2020 was interesting to me, as I was really going to start to push to look at different options for my clients as South Africa was evolving as a new kind of offshore channel. Then 2020 and the COVID pandemic hit, and I just really just saw the world change, from contact center and BPO perspective. As an advisor, we started to see, customers take their work offshore. Take their work remote. And then, as we started to approach them, it was kind of funny. And I'll give you my perspective. If anybody has any other perspectives, Krista, as an advisor, I know some of you guys do a lot of similar work that I do, but early on, again, this is a round table, so we're going to keep it light. Early on, a lot of you guys, on the captive side, were like, "Oh, we got this. We got all the cloud technology. We could take this remote, not a problem." So pretty much April, May, as an advisor, someone who would approach, folks, say, "Do you need any help?" With third party or anything like that. It was kind of like fall back. Then as June came, July came, it got really more interesting because depending on what state, county, city you were in, lockdown was really in full effect now, wasn't it? You couldn't even go into the office unless you were essential and things like that. And now, some of those centers who weren't necessarily ready to go in a remote environment, we're starting to realize the challenges of efficiency, the challenges of quality management, remote wise, and so on. So I started to see a lot more activity, and I'm sure many of my contemporaries, I don't know if Corey's on here, but Krista's probably the same way. The phone started ringing off the hook. All right, I really need some help because we're starting to see down the road here, fourth quarter's coming, and we've only been 3 months into this, and it's a little fiery. So for me, it was a lot of activity in that area, a lot of activity in terms of folks, looking to do something they had never done before, which was, kind of remote work. And what evolved from that really was a BPO, from my perspective, what I saw, a gold mine, particularly when it came to nearshore and offshore work, because even now to date, a full 18 months, after that, we're starting to see that those cost structures that have now increased because of increased wages, because of, a number of things have increased, and the movement and or interest in BPOs has elevated. So that's just my monologue. I just wanted to kind of keep this light, keep it open. And maybe Jason, I could pick on you if you can give us a perspective of New York life since you put your camera on. And if anybody wants to follow up on that, that would be good too.
Can you guys hear me? Is that
Yeah,
better?
we got you now. We got you.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah. Couple of system configures. So yeah, similar to what you were saying, Fred. I think for us, 2020 was when we went home. It was the year of what you found out what you could really do. Because for a long time for us, the thought of work from home was nowhere near on the radar. And we quickly shifted to what we had to do and got all of our call center associates at home. And I kind of liken it to driving a bus and building it at the same time, because we did not have, we had no thoughts of moving to home. And it really isn't a part of our culture. We work better when we have the internal synergies of our culture. There's a lot of DE&I things that we do. There's a lot of collaborative events that we do, and it's part of what makes us the organization we are. So it was definitely challenging to this. And the other thing that was problematic is you didn't really know how much to invest in the long-term strategy, because we kind of thought we were going to come back at a time, and then the goalpost kept getting pushed back further and further. So where we thought our short-term plans became our long-term plans, and then our long-term plan, became ever evolving into what we do. So now we went from we would never do this to we are doing this to now we may come back at a particular time, but it will not be in the same way that we were before, because we will do a hybrid model. And that introduces a whole set of challenges, especially as it relates to employee engagement and people management. We saw good results when we sent our reps home, but we lost a lot of, again, the culture. And what's become problematic now is now in the great, resignation tsunami that we're having right now, where talent is being poached from all over the place. That lack of together in culture has kind of, especially in the eyes of the younger demographic that don't really value the things that we offer as far as pensions and 401k. They're looking at a job as a job, so they don't really they don't really see the value. So then when we lose the sense of togetherness on campus, that is creating a bit of a problem. So right now we're working through and trying to get through is how do we rebuild our culture, because work from home will be a part of it. And how do we do that in such a way, in two ways now? How do you manage people on site? How do you manage people off site, and still have a beneficial culture to there? Because we have got to retain our talent, and it's becoming a little bit more problematic, as I think many of you guys are seeing right now.
Yeah. The little poll I put in front of the session is telling me that 87%, if my number is correct, 87% of you guys have at least 25% of your workforce remote. Then it gets down to 25% is 51 to 75, and close to 30% of you guys have over 75% of your workforce at home. So it's interesting kind of how it's evolved from short term to long term to debatable, right? 3-4 years ago, for those of us who've been in the industry, I don't know if we're ready to go, do remote. There are concerns about security and stuff like that. Doors shut, pandemic happens, and everybody's remote, and now we're, kind of maturing in it. So just kind of curious if any other thoughts in that regard. Like, what were some of the and I do have a question if anybody wants to take it, like, kind of what was your biggest obstacle that the pandemic presented to you guys, whether it would be just to remove remote? Was it the training element of it now that you got on remote? Was it that maybe you were one of those few centers that weren't in the cloud and had to deploy those things? What was kind of like anybody your biggest obstacle, and how'd you guys overcome it? Anybody can take it. Round and round we go. Hey, Lori.
I mean, Fred, for me, I switched in the middle of this pandemic to a new role, and I also took on a leadership role. And I think two of the biggest challenges that I saw were onboarding, and then also just talent evaluation. Like connecting with someone to bring them on to do a specific role at your company through a video chat without sort of getting to know them and feel for them in person. You're really relying on the opinions of others, and if you're able to connect with references or some of those folks. So I had a couple disasters in terms of hiring, and I've had some winners too. And I think that lack of continuity in the hiring process, and not only from just the identification of talent, but also how we go about getting them up to speed on the work that we do, and sort of being able to just provide corrective measures a little bit more efficiently as we would potentially in person versus what we're doing remotely, or just showing examples and have that real-time response was certainly a challenge in respect to previous leadership roles I had, and how I'm expected to work moving forward.
I'm just curious because I know there was, I don't know if it was the keynote this morning, or was it Lori Harvey Corey and Krista's session, where someone had commented that as they evolved into the remote model, one of the, I guess, quality management tools they had were monitoring keystrokes. And I guess once one or two of the agents found that out, they walked out the door. They just felt it was too stressful. So I'm just curious kind of how folks have kind of balanced that out, now that they're home or remote, what kind of tools are there that I guess has proven effective for your business that's been working out?
So that's an interesting thing. First, that became a very and it's still an evolving conversation. Culture over strategy, right? So obviously we would love to know more about what our employees are doing home. But our culture is such of is that it doesn't quite align with who we are as an organization. So we have to kind of walk this fine line, and their varying thoughts. How productive are folks being at home? Do we really know what they're doing? There's a plethora of security concerns, that we are evolving through. So it's an ever evolving conversation. Now, if we have one risk incident or one thing happen, that completely shifts the emphasis. But right now, it's really hard because, to your point, the minute you kind of start talking about that kind of stuff, you do run the risk of increasing attrition because it's a bit intrusive. So it's the tools that we're continuing to use now are just our homegrown stuff that we our off the shelf stuff that we've been using, the workforce management tools that we have in place to monitor, very softly monitor, but it's nothing that is a proactive strategy. It's just maybe reactive to maybe a behavioral correction or things that we need to do. So it's still evolving for us.
Okay.
Hey, Fred, can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you, Harv.
Hey, so, just one comment I wanted to make, as you know, one of my teams does a lot of outbound dialing. And one of the things that's been difficult in this particular pandemic is a lot of those call centers got opportunities to take inbound work or service work. And so, even at the agent level, why do outbound if you can go do inbound calls or go do service work? So a lot of churn happened that impacted our channels there. But the other thing that I noticed is that as in outbound, your attitude or your mindset's really important to create that kind of buzz, that kind of hype on the floor every day. And so moving people home started to really hurt that kind of excitement and momentum and energy. And so almost like you talked about those people who really had tools, et cetera. So my point of saying all that is gamification became more real for me since the pandemic happened, because if you didn't have some level of gamification when you're trying to do outbound when people are home, you lose some of that connectedness and some of that momentum and energy and support that you need to get through the day to do that kind of work. But if you were engaged in that kind of activity, it helped you to bridge some of that disconnect that you lose by not being in the office. So that was a key learning for me, at least from an outbound standpoint, that tools like that could be very helpful.
That's interesting. I'm curious, Harvey. Well, whoever would like to take this. There's definitely some pressure, and I think it was highlighted in the earlier one of the earlier sessions that you were on, Harvey, and I have certainly seen it with regards to price points in the kind of BPO industry. Some of it domestic wise is being pushed by the kind of labor rate increases and then the competitiveness of that.
Mm-hmm.
In the offshore markets, you're starting to see, demand is creating it. So have you started to see that pressure? Because man, your industry, Harvey, is very competitive in that regard. And I know, Jason, in your industry, efficiency and cost effectiveness is there. And I'm sure efficiency with Lori and whoever else is on from a BPO use perspective. It's definitely coming. It's not fully implemented across the board yet, but we all see it just being business people. We know if all of a sudden, in Pennsylvania, you're paying somebody $10 an hour, and now you got to compete with McDonald's at $15 an hour. That cost has to go somewhere. So I'm wondering, are you guys seeing that? Are you planning for anything like that? Are your 2022 budget numbers incorporating any type of expected change or contract flow? Just kind of curious from the observations that I'm seeing.
Yeah, I'll make a comment to start, Fred. There's no doubt there's cost pressure on everybody. And I think a lot of companies see call centers as a cost operation and a cost savings operation, not necessarily a revenue generation and a customer experience. So, we obviously would prefer the latter versus the former. But I will say, even at AT&T, we always focus on effectiveness and efficiency. And, efficiency being a code word, obviously, for cost savings. But on both our consumer program and on our business programs that we pay hourly rates, we up the hourly rate in the total contract this last year for both programs. So I think that's kind of what you're getting at. That cost pressure was hitting both our BPO operations, our vendors, et cetera, and we knew we had to help in that to at least give people a fighting chance to hire and retain the right talent that we need to serve our customers. And in my program, Fred, which is a pay for performance program on the outbound, I'm under intense pressure from a seat standpoint because that model, literally, I'm one of the last ones standing with that type of model. And in the current environment, very difficult to maintain the seat counts that you would like to. So it's being reevaluated.
Yeah, it's real tough, that one.
I'll weigh in a little bit on the cost pressure. I mentioned it in our session this morning too, and I definitely see it just because I see the expense pressure. I see what we're asking our BPO partners to do, what they have to do to be in compliance with local regulations. And I know that the investment they're making is, it's eating in their margin and their profit. I haven't had the cost discussion on a broad level. Part of that is, I think, because Amazon buys at such extreme scale, and some of our contracts are longer term. I think that our partners look at us across the whole ecosystem, and I can't speak to Amazon's pricing strategy, but I could say that in my environment, we're growing. We're growing so quickly and adding so many resources that we're still in that mindset with our partners of, we're going to give you more, right? And so people aren't coming to us saying, but it costs more, because they're still focusing on share of our wallet. At some point, more doesn't offset a loss, right? And so if they can't work with us profitably, I do suspect we'll hear those conversations, but they also know that those conversations are complex because they're approaching the entire, I'm attaching to an Amazon contract, and there's a lot that goes with that. And so we haven't really heard it. But I will say that I get approached frequently by mid-sized to smaller BPOs, and I come from that world, and I love the mid-sized, smaller BPOs. We're probably in a place now where the reason it's working is because some of our partners are so big, and they can make it up in scale. And so I think that whole dynamic of what makes a good partner for us might change, or maybe what makes us a good client for someone. I should flip it that way, because if you can't make it up in scale right now with the increased pricing pressure to meet our standards and meet all of the government regs, it's challenging. And I will reiterate, we don't use work from home. I know we are the unicorn. So to keep agents in, I know there's expense with that, but to keep agents on site, there's expense with that too. And it's material, like door-to-door transportation in many countries every day for every agent. So there's a lot of things that go into staying in the brick and mortar space during the pandemic as well. And I'm super sensitive to how hard that is for our partners.
Especially if you're global like you, where if you're talking work from home in another country, it's not the same. Like you say, you can't assume they all have the right type of environment. So. That's right. Definitely get that. Thanks, Lori. I appreciate that. What is interesting too is, or I don't know if it's a concern, but again, this is all about a roundtable observation discussion. How do you guys see, perhaps in the next 12 months, what your call center is going to look like? It might be 50% remote now. Think it'll still be 50% a year from now? You think you'll have less outsourced partners? You think you'll have more outsourced partners? You know, this is the crystal ball thing. I don't know. You know, you guys have a better view of kind of how 2020 to now 2021 has impacted or benefited your particular industry or business. You kind of know what those internal discussions have been that don't have to be disclosed here, but you kind of have an idea. Just kind of curious what folks think their context, and I'm talking to everybody, the BPOs on the phone, as well as, you know, just what are you starting to feel like in that area?
Fred, I would comment on that a moment. Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Okay. I'm having a bad connection, sorry. So, you know, we consult with captive internal enterprise clients and operations across multiple verticals and globally. And we also support BPOs, which is something I'm always proud of, because they don't always like hiring consultants. But I will just say, from my perspective across all of that, people are all over the board. Our clients, we have clients that will never go back in an office. We have clients that are already back in an office or barely even left in some very rare places where they didn't have to. I think everybody's still kind of trying to figure that out. And I think the real pressure is that the power it is in the employee base, right? Employees get to choose now whether they want to work from home or they want to go into an office. And so I don't know that all the power of choice necessarily, unless maybe you come with a really big brand behind you. You know, it's going to be kind of labor's call on where they want to be. And so I think we're going to see a myriad of models of how businesses are going to make this work. Everyone's going to have to figure it out on their own.
Yeah.
And that's also going to be market specific, right? So in major metropolitan areas where one of my reps can say, you know what, I'm not coming back. I'm going to do some part-time gig, and then I'm going to do some gig economy stuff to make up the difference, because the cost of driving into the office and daycare and all these other things are becoming prohibitive. So if I'm looking to increase, you know, someone's expenses by $500, $600 a month, they got to make some tough choices, and that becomes problematic. So, you know, to answer the question, we have what we think we would like to do, and we are going to see what the market does and our employee base does, because we can't be crazy and say hard and fast. We have to continuously evolve our strategy. So I think there's a lot of uncharted territory out here, because we just don't know. There's so many external factors that it's going to make this really difficult to predict in the next year or so.
I have a little bit of a unique perspective here, because I work for an ancillary sort of business to call centers or BPOs. I'm with a tier 1 mobile messaging aggregator, and I can say with certainty the way in which mobile messaging has been leveraged over the course of the pandemic has gone up exponentially. Whether you're looking at, you know, the basic sort of customer survey stuff that you may have done via voice before, or running people down specific funnels before they would actually get to chatting with somebody, so they can minimize amount of time a call center may be necessary, or even looking at how some organizations we work with in healthcare and BFSI, or even in e-commerce, are leveraging sort of their own codes to drive people into apps to provide that sort of information. We've seen a lot of that to reduce the sort of wait times that you're looking at from the call center and BPO perspective. And then, you know, even like we've looked at larger organizations utilizing some of the newer solutions, like Lowe's is a really great example of how something like Apple Business Chat is being used, where you can review the product, you can look at the mobile wallet, you can have two-way chat all right there, where the need to interact with someone is essentially taken away in some respects. So as much as it's affected some organizations or businesses versus others, I think, mobile messaging has really stepped in a lot over the last year to support a lot of these, services that can create greater levels of efficiency.
So I think cost of labor has definitely been an impact. I've seen from my standpoint where I sit, a lot of movement, particularly recently, of folks looking to do more in, let's just say, non-US markets. Good percentage of what I do is in non-US markets now, where it wasn't pre-pandemic. Folks looking to work in different markets. And I think a lot of it is what, to some degree, you've all validated in our discussion today. If the cost pressure gets there, if it just becomes too much of a burden to maintain, even a BPO partner in the US, if the rates are getting too high, you only have but so much number in your business case where you have almost no choice but to either move to a nearshore or offshore environment or to hybrid it, keep a certain amount in the US, but, leverage your overall cost favorability with a nearshore partner. So definitely starting to see that from my perspective. And then kind of as you guys have also discussed too, I think the remote model will remain solidly in place, Fred Chatting's view, for at least the next 16 months before any kind of trends start to evolve. Because I think people are just kind of waiting and seeing. And they're starting to see the first elements of it is how employees react. When you say you need to come back to work or what. And I think that's starting to trigger, certain benefits and certain, wage increases, which we're starting to see. And then, I think like Jason pointed out, it's kind of like, well, we are where we are now. We're just going to hold tight and see how this thing plays out. And if we need help, we'll get help. So it's just really interesting. I was curious kind of how everybody kind of looked at it. So, thank you, Laura, Jason, Zach, Harvey, Krista, and anybody else who still wants to comment. But we're just trying to summarize what I heard so far. Any other comments off of that?
No, I think we captured it.
Cool.
I think what I would maybe just kind of reiterate or maybe just take a moment to expand on is, obviously a lot of conversation today around the labor piece of all of this, which has huge impact for all of us. But there's a big tech play in all of this work at home as well. So, not just some of those initial phases, Fred, I feel like you brought up when you kind of were summarizing the year, which sounded very similar to mine. But then once everybody got home and connected, there was a whole new strategy to create a more secure and a more long-term solid plan for that had to happen. And we shifted from like, how do we just, Krista, how can you just get us up remote? Especially for some of our clients still on-prem, to Krista, how do we manage and engage, right? Operationally, how do we live in this world? And I think even when we had our panel earlier today talking about the workforce management and workforce challenges and the shifting that's going on, that's kind of coming up in this discussion again, there was a ton of questions and comments in the feed on that panel discussion around employee engagement. And I think Harvey's the one that brought up gamification. I often laugh as a consultant that we use a lot of keywords in this industry that aren't really actually deployed. Omni-channel. I mean, there's very few operations we walk into that have seamless agent interface screen, omni-channel below the tier 1 BPOs. Even some of our largest logo clients have disparate systems still. And one of those other AI is still maturing in our opinion. But gamification is a term that we used to call spiffing for those of you that are as old as me. And I call it like automated spiffing, and it should have been involved way more aggressively deployed in this space like 5 years ago. It impacts employee experience, retention, engagement, which impacts customer experience. And I do think its time is now as a tech because of the situation. My sidebar on
Thanks.
technology during this time.
Thanks for reminding me of how long we've been in the industry. Spiffing, man, that takes me back to my print memory.
This.